April 14th, 1945. North Atlantic Ocean, 200 feet below the surface. Captain Karl Adolf Schlitt stood in the cramped officer's head of U-1206, staring at what should have been a simple piece of equipment, a toilet. Around him, the submarine creaked and groaned under the pressure of 200 feet of seawater. Somewhere above, British patrol aircraft circled, hunting for German U-boats. One mistake, one sound, one bubble trail reaching the surface, and they were dead. He reached for the flush lever. This was his first patrol as commander. 27 days at sea, and he had managed to avoid calling for help with something as embarrassing as using the head. He was the captain. He had navigated through minefields. He had evaded destroyer attacks. Surely he could operate a toilet. He turned the first valve, then the second, then the third. For exactly 2 seconds, nothing happened. Then ice-cold seawater exploded from the toilet bowl with the force of a fire hose, blasting directly into his face. The roar was deafening in the tiny compartment. Water sprayed everywhere, flooding the deck. Rising past his ankles in seconds, Schlitt grabbed for the valves, trying desperately to reverse what he had done. They would not budge. The water pressure was too strong. In 8 minutes, this single mistake would trigger a cascade of disasters that would sink his submarine, kill 4 of his men, and turn U-1206 into one of the most embarrassing losses in naval warfare history. But to understand how a toilet sank a German U-boat, you first have to understand what the world looked like in April 1945. Germany was losing. Not just losing. Collapsing. Soviet forces were closing in on Berlin from the east. American and British armies pushed from the west. The Third Reich had perhaps weeks left to live. Everyone knew it. But the Kriegsmarine still had its U-boats. And those U-boats were still dangerous. The Battle of the Atlantic had raged for nearly 6 years. German submarines had sent more than 3,000 Allied ships to the bottom. They had killed tens of thousands of sailors. They had come dangerously close to cutting Britain off from American supplies entirely. By 1945, the tables had turned. Allied anti-submarine warfare had become devastatingly effective. Long-range patrol aircraft, improved radar, better depth charges, escort carriers. The hunter had become the hunted. 3 out of 4 U-boat crewmen would not survive the war. U-1206 was part of Germany's newest generation of submarines, a type WWIIC, sophisticated, well-armed, and equipped with the latest technology, including something that seemed revolutionary at the time, a high-pressure toilet system. Before this innovation, U-boats had a serious problem. Waste had to be stored in tanks and emptied when the submarine surfaced. This meant boats running deep to avoid enemy hunters had to hold everything. For crews of 50 men on patrols lasting weeks, this was more than uncomfortable. It was a tactical liability. Submarines could not stay submerged as long as their batteries allowed, because the waste tanks filled up first. German engineers solved this problem with typical over-engineering. They designed a toilet that could flush directly into the ocean, even at depth. High-pressure valves, multiple steps, specific sequences. When operated correctly, it was brilliant. When operated incorrectly, it was catastrophic. The system was so complicated that the Navy designated special toilet operators, trained specialists whose entire job was to make sure nobody flushed wrong. Unteroffizier Fritz Wiedmann was U-1206's toilet specialist, 19 years old. From Hamburg, he had memorized every step. He had posted instructions on the wall of each head. He had drilled the crew repeatedly. Always call me before flushing at depth, he told them, always. But Karl Adolf Schlitt was the captain, and captains did not call for help to use the bathroom. The water was knee-deep now. Schlitt threw open the compartment door. Water poured into the corridor like a river. He could hear shouts from other parts of the boat as crew members realized something was terribly wrong. Flood in the officer's head, he bellowed. All hands, within seconds. Men were scrambling through the submarine, sealing watertight doors, checking compartments, searching for the source. Weidman arrived first, his face going white when he saw the water still gushing from the toilet. Which valves did you turn, Herr Captain? But there was no time for explanations. Weidman waded into the flooded compartment, fighting against the torrent. The water was waist-deep, still rising, still spraying from the bowl with unrelenting pressure. He could not reach the shut-off valve. The water was too deep, the pressure too strong. That is when Chief Engineer Otto Wiegand arrived with the news that turned a serious problem into a crisis. Captain, he said quietly, the water is flooding into the battery compartment. Every submariner knew what that meant. U-boats ran on diesel engines on the surface, underwater. They used electric motors powered by massive battery banks. Those batteries contained sulfuric acid. When seawater mixed with sulfuric acid, it created chlorine gas, the same poison that had killed thousands in the trenches of World War I. Odorless at first, then a sweet smell, then burning in the throat and lungs, then suffocation. Schlitt made the only decision he could. Emergency surface. Now, the order was on admission of defeat. When a U-boat surfaced in hostile waters during daylight, it became a target, slow, vulnerable, visible for miles. But staying submerged with chlorine gas spreading through the hull meant certain death. Emergency blow. First Watch Officer Heinrich Becker shouted into the speaking tube. All ballast tanks. Surface, surface, surface. Compressed air roared. Into the ballast tanks. The submarine shuddered. The bow tilted sharply upward. Men grabbed for handholds as the deck became a steep slope. In the battery compartment. The reaction had already begun. Seawater dripped through the deck plates onto the battery cells. Wisps of yellowish-green gas curled upward. Chlorine. Machinists. Mate Klaus Bergman smelled it first. Sharp. Acrid. Burning his nose and throat. Gas. Chlorine gas in the battery room. The crew did not need to be told twice. Men scrambled through hatches, climbing toward fresh air, toward life. Some grabbed emergency breathing apparatus, others pressed wet rags to their faces. U-1206 shot toward the surface like a cork, rising from 200 feet to zero in less than a minute. The pressure change made ears pop. Equipment broke loose. The submarine broached the surface with such violence that water cascaded over the conning tower. Open the hatch. The conning tower hatch spun open. Fresh air poured in. Men climbed up the ladder, gasping, coughing, their eyes streaming. They emerged onto the deck to find themselves in a grey, choppy sea about 8 miles off the coast of Scotland. For exactly 90 seconds, it seemed like they might survive. Then someone spotted the aircraft. Bearing to 70, a British patrol plane. Avro Anson, probably from RAF Coastal Command at Peterhead. The pilot had spotted them immediately. Up here, on the surface, U-1206 was as obvious as a whale in a bathtub. Dive. Dive. Schlitt screamed. But even as he gave the order, he knew it was futile. Half the crew was still on deck. The hatches were open. The chlorine gas was still spreading below. They were dead in the water. The British pilot knew it too. The Anson banked sharply and began its attack run. Man the anti-aircraft gun. The gunner got off a burst. Tracer rounds asked toward the British. Plane fell short. The Anson's pilot pressed his attack. Machine gun bullets stitched across the water. Then across U-1206's hull. Pinging, ricocheting. One round struck Seaman Werner Krause in the shoulder. He collapsed, blood spreading across his uniform. Schlitt grabbed the klaxon. 3 long blasts. Abandoned ship. Every submariner's nightmare. Happening all at once. The boat flooding. Poisoned with gas. Under direct attack on the surface. Get the wounded to the life rafts. The crew moved with desperate efficiency. Pulling out rafts. Helping the wounded. As the rafts deployed, a massive wave slammed into U-1206's hull. The submarine rolled sharply. 3 men were thrown into the sea. Man overboard. Schlitt watched in horror as the 3 sailors flailed in the grey waves. Heavy clothing dragging them down. One went under, did not resurface. The other grabbed a life raft that had broken free. The Anson made another pass. This time the pilot held fire. He could see the Germans abandoning ship. The battle was over. Karl Adolf Schlitt was the last man to leave U-1206. Tradition demanded it. He stood on the conning tower, watching his crew bob in the water round him. His first command. His only command. Now just another wreck waiting to join the others on the ocean floor. He jumped. The cold hit like a hammer. Drove the breath from his lungs. He surfaced, gasping, and swam toward the nearest raft. Captain, what are our orders, Weidman? The toilet specialist, his face pale with shock. Schlitt almost laughed. Orders? Swim for shore, he said. It's all we can do. 8 miles, in frigid water. Most would not make it an hour before hypothermia set in. They watched as U-1206 slowly sank. The conning tower disappeared last beneath the waves. 11:23 a.m. 36 minutes after Schlitt had flushed the toilet wrong. The British patrol plane circled overhead, marking their position. 40 minutes later, a Royal Navy rescue vessel arrived. They pulled the German sailors from the water. The ones who were still alive. 36 men survived. 4 died. 3 drowned. 1 from injuries sustained during the attack. For Karl Adolf Schlitt, the ordeal was just beginning. In the British POW camp at Grisdale Hall, Schlitt had plenty of time to think about what had happened. Word had spread among the other captured U-boat commanders. The toilet story. It was almost impossible to believe. A submarine sunk because its captain could not work a toilet. But it was true, and everyone knew it. The British interrogators were professional, even sympathetic. Strange things happen in war, they told him. But Schlitt could see the amusement in their eyes. This story would be told for generations. Back in Germany, what remained of the Kriegsmarine reviewed the incident with grim faces. Schlitt's official report was carefully worded. Malfunction in high-pressure toilet system led to flooding. Water reached battery compartment, generating chlorine gas. Emergency surface required. Boat lost under enemy attack while crew evacuated. It was all true. It just did not mention that the malfunction was the captain turning valves in the wrong sequence. The high-pressure toilet system, that marvel of German engineering, was quietly retired from future U-boat designs. Better to use the old tanks and surface periodically than risk another U-1206. But the lesson went deeper than plumbing. What happened on U-1206 was a microcosm of Germany's entire war effort in those final months. Sophisticated technology, over-engineered solutions, Systems so complex that even trained personnel struggled to operate them correctly, and commanders, too proud to admit they needed help. The Type VIIC U-boat was a masterpiece of naval engineering. Sophisticated torpedoes, advanced sonar, encrypted communications, and a toilet system that required a dedicated specialist. This was the German military in 1945. Brilliant, deadly, and collapsing under the weight of its own complexity. Japanese commanders at Guadalcanal had learned that assumptions could kill. They believed American Marines were soft, undisciplined. They were catastrophically wrong. That assumption cost them thousands of lives. Karl Adolf Schlitt assumed he could operate a complicated system without training or help. That assumption cost him his submarine and for men's lives. Both learned the same lesson. In war, there is no room for assumptions, no room for pride. No room for believing you know better than the specialists who trained for years to do a specific job. Fritz Wiedmann, the 19-year-old toilet specialist, had tried to drill this into the crew. Always call me before flushing at depth. Always. It was not about ego. It was about survival. But Schlitt was the captain, and captains did not need help using the bathroom. The wreck of U-1206 sits on the seabed off Peterhead, Scotland, in about 230 feet of water. Professional divers located it in 1999. The submarine is remarkably well preserved. The conning tower still rises from the hull. The deck gun is still in place. And somewhere inside, in the officer's compartment, is the toilet that started it. All harmless now after more than 7 decades underwater. Divers who have visited the wreck report an eerie feeling, knowing the story, knowing how it got there. The submarine is a war grave. It deserves respect. But it is impossible to dive on U-1206 without thinking about the toilet. The story has found new life in the internet age. Viral articles, YouTube videos, social media posts. Each retelling emphasizes different aspects: the engineering failure, the captain's hubris, the sheer bad luck. But all share one element: cosmic irony. In the vast, violent tragedy of World War II, which killed tens of millions, there is something almost comforting about a story where the disaster was small-scale, absurd, and survivable. For most involved, 4 men died on U-1206. Their deaths were no less tragic because the cause was a toilet rather than a torpedo. But 36 men lived. They spent the rest of the war as POWs, eventually went home. In the context of the U-boat war, where 3 out of 4 submariners never returned, that is almost a happy ending. What can we learn from U-1206? Perhaps that technology, no matter how sophisticated, is only as good as the humans operating it. That overconfidence can turn a minor problem into catastrophe. That sometimes the most dangerous enemy is not the opposing military force, but our own pride. Or perhaps the lesson is simpler. When there is a specialist trained to handle a complicated system, let them do their job. Fritz Wiedmann knew those toilets inside and out. If Schlitt had simply pressed the call button, U-1206 might have completed its patrol, might have survived the war, might have been scrapped in some German port years later. But Schlitt did not call for help. He was the commander. He had navigated through storms. He had evaded destroyers. Surely he could work a toilet. It was the last mistake he made as a submarine captain. At 10:47 a.m. on April 14, 1945, 200 feet below the North Atlantic, Karl Adolf Schlitt turned a valve the wrong way. 8 minutes later, U-1206 was flooding. 36 minutes after that, It was on the ocean floor. All because of a toilet. In the annals of military history, filled with tales of heroic sacrifice and strategic brilliance, the story of U-1206 stands alone. A reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers come from the places we least expect. Even the bathroom. Especially the bathroom. The war ended 3 weeks later. Schlitt was still in British custody. He had commanded U-1206 for exactly 27 days. His combat record as captain was 0 enemy ships sunk, 0 tonnage destroyed, 1 submarine lost. Cause of loss: toilet error. He was repatriated to Germany in 1947. He lived quietly for the rest of his life. He rarely spoke about his naval career. When historians discovered the full story in the 1970s, Schlitt declined all interviews. Some humiliations, even 30 years old, were too fresh to revisit. But the story lived on, because it captured something true about war, about technology, about human nature. The most sophisticated weapons system in the world means nothing if the person operating it turns the wrong valve. A $1 million submarine can be sunk by a 10-cent mistake, and pride, in the end, is more dangerous than any enemy. The Japanese learned this at Guadalcanal when they assumed American Marines could not fight. The Germans learned it across Europe when they assumed complex weapons systems would overcome Allied numbers. And Carl Adolf Schlitt learned it 100 feet below the North Atlantic, when he assumed he could flush a toilet without help. They were all wrong, and the price of being wrong in war is always paid in blood. For men died because their captain was too proud to call for the toilet specialist. 36 survived because British sailors pulled them from the water, instead of leaving them to drown. That is war. Tragedy and mercy, hubris and humiliation, technology and human error, all compressed into 36 minutes on a submarine that should never have sunk, but did, because of a toilet.